She laughed at his offer. Every duke in the room stared. The Duke of Wrenmore made me his offer between the soup and the fish, and I laughed before I had decided to. It was not a polite laugh. I have a polite laugh. I keep it the way other women keep smelling salts, for occasions when something must be survived. This was the other kind. It came up out of me like water finding a crack, and by the time I had a hand to my mouth, it had already crossed the length of the table and turned every powdered head in the room. There were 4 dukes at that dinner, and a marquis who behaved like one, and not a single one of them had ever heard a woman laugh at Marcus Carr. They looked at me as though I had stood on my chair. They looked at him to see what he would do. And his Grace, who had just told me, kindly, he believed, generously, that he meant to relieve me of the burden of my late husband's bank, set down his spoon and went very still. "Mrs. Vane," he said, "I have amused you." "You have, Your Grace." I touched my napkin to my lips, not because I needed it, but because it gave my hands something honest to do. "Forgive me. It has been some years since a man offered to take everything I own and called it a rescue." That was the moment the Marquis leaned forward. "I want you to understand what had been offered, because the offer is the whole of it." Edmund had built Vane and Company from a single counting house off Lombard Street, with a back room that smelled of tallow and ink. And when he died, he left it to me. Not to a trustee, not to a board of careful gentlemen, to me. Because I had kept his ledgers beside him for 7 years, and he had never once found me out in an error. A widow may hold what a wife may not. The law that strips a married woman of her last farthing the moment she takes a husband leaves a widow alone. And so, for 2 years, I had been the only thing in London that 4 dukes feared and could not name. A woman with money of her own, and no man with the legal right to it. The Duke of Wrenmore had decided to correct that. He had not said marriage. He was too clever to say marriage at a dinner. He had said purchase. A generous figure, a fair figure. The figure a man names when he has never once been told no, and does not believe the word applies to him. He would buy the controlling interest. He would lift the weight of commerce from my shoulders. I might keep a house in town, and a carriage, and the dignity of having been, once, a clever man's wife. I laughed because I knew something he did not. I knew that the Duke of Wrenmore was already my debtor, and that he had no idea. "But I am ahead of myself, and the curiosity gap, my late husband would say, is the only thing more valuable than capital. So I will keep it a moment, the way I kept it that night, and tell you instead what I noticed about the Duke while the table waited for me to be ashamed. I noticed his right hand. He had laid it flat on the cloth when he set down his spoon, and across the back of it ran an old burn, white and ridged, the kind that does not come from a careless candle. A man with that hand should hide it under the table at a dinner. He did not. He let it lie in the light as though daring the room to ask, and not one of those well-bred people would ever ask, and he knew it. There was a whole story in that hand, refused to everyone, and I found, against my will, against 2 years of good practice, that I wanted to know it. That is a dangerous thing to want. I weighed it the way Edmund taught me to weigh a guinea I did not trust. I had his little folding balance in my reticule, his brass coin scale, worn smooth at the hinge from his thumb, and I carried it everywhere, the way some women carry a husband's miniature. I did not take it out, but I felt it through the silk, and I thought, whatever this man is, do not take him at his stamp. Weigh him. "You are not offended?" the Duke said. It was not quite a question. "I am rarely offended, Your Grace." Offence is a luxury for people who can afford to refuse business. I have refused yours. That is a different thing. I return to my fish. But I thank you for the figure. It tells me precisely what you think I am worth. And a woman should always know that before the dancing. The Marquess laughed then, sharp and delighted. And I understood that I had just become the most interesting woman in London, and that this was not at all the same as being safe. He called on me 4 days later, which was 3 days sooner than was proper, and exactly as long as a proud man can make himself wait. I received him in the room Edmund had used for business, because I wanted him uncomfortable, and because it was the truest room in the house. There were no flowers in it. There was a long table, in the ledgers on their shelf in their dull green boards, and the smell of ink that no amount of beeswax had ever driven out, and a single window that looked north over the chimney pots, so the light was even and cold, and good for reading figures by. I sat where Edmund had sat. I let the Duke stand. "You did not have to receive me here," he said, looking at the ledgers the way a soldier looks at terrain. "I receive everyone here. It saves time. Men say a great deal less foolishness in a room that keeps accounts." I folded my hands. "You have come to improve your offer. Don't. There is no figure. I am not being coy, Your Grace. I want you to hear me, because I think you are a man who has never in his life been refused by someone he could not crush. And I would like to be the first who teaches you the experience is survivable. I will not sell." He was quiet for a moment. The cold light lay across the burn on his hand. "My mother," he said, "told me I would find you grasping." "Your mother is a shrewd woman who has confused a closed hand with a grasping one. They are opposites. A grasping woman reaches for what is yours. I am only declining to hand over what is mine." I tilted my head. "Why do you want it? And do not say the burden of my widowhood. You have not lost a night's sleep over my widowhood. And we will get on better if you grant that I can tell the difference." That was the first crack. I watched it happen, watched the practiced ducal surface go thin for a heartbeat, watched something underneath look out at me, startled, like a man who has heard his own name spoken in a country where he believed himself a stranger. "Because I am told," he said slowly, "that a great deal of my family's money has flowed, over the years, into accounts I cannot trace, and every road I have walked down looking for the end of it stops at the same wall. At your husband's name. At yours." There it was. He had found the edge of the thing without knowing its shape, the way you find a stair in the dark with your shin. "Sit down, Your Grace," I said. He sat. It cost him something. I respected him for spending it. "Some of your family's money has indeed flowed into Vane and Company," I said. "It has flowed out again too, in the form of loans. I will not tell you to whom, because a bank that gossips is a bank that closes, and mine will not close. But I will tell you this, since you have come honestly and stood in a room with no flowers in it and not complained. You do not have a creditor problem, Your Grace. You have a cousin." He did not move. That was the thing about him I would come to know, that his stillness was not absence but the opposite, a great pressure held behind a closed door. "Gerald," he said, "I have named no one." "You did not have to." He looked at his hands. "I have wandered. God help me, I have wandered for a year, and called myself disloyal for it." He looked up. "Why are you telling me anything at all? You owe me nothing. By your own account, I am the man who tried to buy you cheap." "Because," I said, and I felt the truth of it as I said it, which is always inconvenient. You let your hand lie in the light at that dinner. A man who hides nothing he is ashamed of is a man worth one true sentence. Consider it spent. Now go home and look at your cousin's tailor's bills before you look at anything else. A man's ruin is always written first in his coats. He came back. Of course he came back. The question is never whether a man like that comes back, but what he is when he does. And the Duke of Wrenmore came back changed in a way I did not expect and did not entirely want, because it made him harder to weigh. He came back having looked. He laid it all on Edmund's table. Not the figures, he did not yet have the figures, but the shape of a year spent not looking, the brother of his own dead father's making, the cousin who had stood beside him at his wife's grave and wept with what Marcus had believed was love, and now suspected was arithmetic. He talked for an hour. I let him. I have learned that a man who has never been allowed to be uncertain will, if you give him a cold room and no flowers, and a woman who does not flinch, eventually set the whole weight down, and that what he sets down tells you more than any ledger. He had loved his wife. He had not been able to save her. The burn on his hand was from a different fire entirely. A tenant's cottage, when he was 22. A child he had gone in after, when the men he commanded would not. And the child had lived, and Marcus had carried the mark and the knowledge together ever since. That he was a man who went into fires, which is a useful thing to know about a man, and a terrible thing to be. You should not tell me these things, I said when he had finished. You hardly know me. I know you keep your husband's coin scale in your reticule, he said. I watched you reach for it at the dinner and stop. I have wondered since what you were weighing. I had not known he had seen. It went through me like cold water that he had seen, and I covered it by taking the little balance out at last and setting it on the table between us. Open. The two small brass pans trembling level. This, I said. Edmund weighed every guinea that came across his counter for 30 years, because half of England clips its coin and gilds its brass and hands it across as gold, your grace. And the only protection a careful man has is to weigh the thing itself and not the stamp upon it. I touched one pan with a fingertip. It dipped and rose. I was weighing you. At the dinner, I have been weighing you since. It is a habit I cannot break and would not if I could. And I tell you so that you understand I am not a woman who will be moved by a fire and a scar. I will be moved, if I am moved at all, by what you weigh. The room was very quiet. North light, ink, the small living tremble of the brass. He had leaned in over the table to look at the scale, and so had I. And we were closer than the room had any business allowing. Close enough that I could see the burn was older than I had thought. Close enough that one honest inch would have undone 2 years of good practice. And, he said, he did not move the inch. I will think of that, sometimes, until I die, that he left the inch to me, when no one had ever left me anything. The essay is not complete, I said, and took the balance up and closed it. And the moment closed with it, because I had felt the air go out of the room, and I did not trust where it was going, or how much of it I had begun, against every rule I owned, to want it to. I will tell you now what I had been keeping. It was not only that Gerald owed my bank £14,000 against expectations that did not yet exist. A man borrowing on the chance his cousin would die without a son which is a wager against a life, and I have always despised the men who place it. It was that 3 weeks before the dinner, Gerald Carr had come to me himself, all charm and cold hands, and proposed that I might find it worth my while to call in nothing, forgive nothing, simply delay, and in exchange he would see that the Duke's generous offer for my bank went through at a figure that would make me, he said, the richest widow in England. He had sat in this room and offered to sell me his cousin's pocket in exchange for my silence on his debts. He had assumed, because I was a woman and a tradesman's relict, that I would take it. I had shown him the door. But I had not warned Marcus, because a banker does not betray one client's confidence to another, not even when she is beginning, against every rule she has, to care which of them survives. That was my secret, and the night it detonated was the night of Lady Carrington's ball, where I had not meant to go, and went anyway because the Duke had asked me in a note, with no flattery in it at all, only the words, "I find I would rather weigh the evening with you in it." I am not made of stone. I went. Gerald found me by the card room. Mrs. Vane. He had a way of saying my name that put quotation marks around the Mrs., a little reminder of where I had come from. You look magnificent. Trade agrees with you. Tell me, has my cousin made you an honest offer yet, or only a flattering one? Your cousin's offers are his own affair. Everything of my cousin's is my affair, Gerald said pleasantly. Or will be, when he has the decency to break his neck on that grey hunter of his. He smiled. I jest. I am devoted to him. I only mean that you and I, Mrs. Vane, are the two people in London who know exactly how much the great Duke of Wrenmore is worth. And it is so much less than the world believes. We could be such friends, you and I. Or we could be the other thing. I find I have not decided which would profit me more. And then he did the first dangerous thing, the thing I should have seen coming and did not, because I had been busy weighing a man with a burned hand, and had taken my eye off the man with the cold one. Within the week, a whisper went out across the city, quiet, expert, untraceable, that Vane and Company was overextended, that the widow had lent unwisely, that a great house was about to call its money and find the cupboard bare. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. My books were sound, soundest in London. But a bank does not run on soundness. It runs on belief. And belief is the lightest coin there is. And by Thursday, there were 11 men in my front office asking, very politely, to withdraw their deposits. And behind them, I could see the shape of the panic that buries a bank in a single afternoon, if its principal so much as blinks. I did not blink. I paid every man his money to the shilling, in gold, weighed in front of him on the counter-scale. And I had Mrs. Oakes bring tea to the queue, as though it were a morning call. And by Friday, the whisper had nothing to feed on, and died. But it had been close. It had been a hand's breadth from the end of everything Edmund built, and I knew exactly whose hand. The Duke came to me white with a fury I had not seen in him. It was Gerald, he said. I have proof of the whisper now. A man he paid, who would rather be paid by me. He tried to break you, to force you to sell at any price to me so that he might. He stopped. I have been such a fool. He meant for me to buy your bank with money I would have had to borrow from your bank, and never know I had done it, and call myself your rescuer the whole while. Yes, I said. You knew. He searched my face. You knew at the dinner. That is why you laughed. I knew at the dinner that your generous offer was a noose 3 men were holding, and only one of them understood. Yes, I laughed because it was that, or weep at the waste of you. I had not meant to say the waste of you. It was out before the balance could catch it. Your Grace. Marcus. Your Grace, I said more firmly, because the brass was trembling, and I did not trust it. I am going to say a thing to you, and you will not like it. You came here the first day to buy me. You have come every day since to apologize for it, in 100 small ways, with notes and confessions, and a scar you have shown no one else. Stop. I am not the one you wronged. You wronged yourself by not looking at the men closest to you. I do not want your apology. I want to know what you intend to do. Because your cousin is not finished, and I am tired of being the cleverest person in every room, and the safest in none. He looked at me for a long moment, and the fury went out of his face, and something steadier came into it. Marry me, he said. And God help me, the balance went out of my hand and clattered on the table, both pans ringing. That, I said when I could, is the most expensive sentence you have ever spoken, and you have not done the sums. I have done nothing but the sums for a fortnight. He came around the table. He did not touch me. He was too clever, or too kind, or both. If you marry me, the law makes everything you own mine. I know it. You know it. Every man at that dinner knows it, and it is why they looked at you the way they did. A woman with a fortune and no husband is a fortune lying in the road. I am asking you to hand me the very thing you laughed at me for trying to buy. He was close now. And I am telling you that the day after the wedding, I will sign it all back into a trust that the law cannot touch, and I cannot touch, and only you control. And I will spend the rest of my life as the one man in England who married the richest widow in it and took not a shilling. Let them weigh that, Sophia. Let the whole room weigh that. It was the choice, and he had made it first, in the open, before he knew whether I would meet him, which is the only kind of choosing that counts. I should tell you, I answered with my heart. I am not made that way. I picked the balance up off the table, and I held it, and I felt the worn place his thumb would never know Edmund's thumb had made. And I weighed the man one last time. The fire he walked into, the hand in the light, the sums done not for profit, but for me. And the assay came back the way I had been afraid for a fortnight it would. Yes, I said. And then we are going to ruin your cousin together. And I am going to enjoy it more than is Christian. Gerald moved his second piece before we could move ours, because cornered men are quick. He produced a paper. It surfaced through a solicitor of the sort that has an office but no clients. An assignment dated 4 months before Edmund's death, in Edmund's hand, or a hand very like it, pledging the controlling interest in Vane and Company to the Wrenmore estate against the late Duke's mortgage. If it were true, then the bank had never been mine to refuse to sell. It had belonged, in effect, to the dukedom all along, which meant, to Gerald's expectations, which meant Gerald could go into Chancery and tie my every shilling in a suit that would outlive us both, and break the bank in the breaking of it. It was a forgery. I knew it was a forgery the way I know my own name. But Chancery does not run on knowing. It runs, like a bank, on belief and on documents. And Gerald had a document. And the document was good. Good enough that Marcus's own lawyers went grey reading it. Good enough that for 3 days I sat in the cold north room and could not make the figures come right. Because there is a kind of fear that gets between a clever woman and her arithmetic. And I had not felt it since the week Edmund died. We were apart in those 3 days. Not by quarrel, by the simple cruelty of it. He in his solicitor's chambers, I in mine. Each of us fighting a separate front of the same war, and unable to reach the other across it. And I learned in those 3 days the precise weight of a thing I had spent 2 years pretending I did not want, which was the right to not be alone in the cold room. Mrs. Oakes found me at midnight, with the forgery spread under 3 candles and the coin balance in my fist, and she said, "Ma'am, you have weighed everything in London but the page in front of you," and went to bed, and left me to understand her. I weighed the page, not the words, the paper. Lady Carrington gave a second ball, because that is what London does while empires fall in drawing rooms. It dances. Half the men who had queued at my counter were there, and all 4 dukes, and the Marquis, and Gerald Carr in a coat that cost more than a clerk earns in a year, and was, I now knew, unpaid for. And the Duke of Wrenmore, who had agreed to let me choose the ground. I chose the ground. I asked Lady Carrington, who adores a scene the way a cat adores a wounded bird, for the use of her library and the presence of any guest who cared to come. And they came, the whole glittering pack of them, because word had gone round that the banker's widow and the Duke's cousin meant to have it out. And there is no theatre in England to compare with money dying in good clothes. Gerald was magnificent, I will grant him that. He stood with his solicitor and his forged page, and he was so very sorry, so reluctant, a man forced by duty to reveal that the late, lamented Edmund Vane had quietly mortgaged his wife's whole future and let her play at banking on borrowed ground. He was gentle about it. That was the cruelty in him. He was always gentle. The room turned to look at me the way it had looked at me across the soup, waiting to see what I would do. I set Edmund's coin balance on Lady Carrington's library table. "My husband," I said, "weighed every guinea that crossed his counter for 30 years, because the surest forgery in England is not a false coin. A false coin any fool can ring on a table. The surest forgery is a true seeming paper, and the only defense against it is the same as against false gold. You do not weigh the stamp. You weigh the thing itself." I looked at Gerald. "Bring me your page, Mr. Carr." He should not have done it. But 4 dukes were watching, and a man so very sorry cannot refuse to be transparent. And he laid the forgery on the table beside the balance with a small bow. "This paper," I said, "is dated the 4th of March, 1815. Edmund's hand, you will all agree. See the long descender on the V. See the way he crossed his 7s in the continental style he never lost. A masterwork." I let them lean in. "There is only the one difficulty. Edmund Vane bought his paper from Watman's at Maidstone. The same maker, the same wove stock, for the whole of his life. And Watman's did not put this particular watermark into the world until the autumn of 1816. I held the page up to the candle. The crowned shield swam in the grain, clear as a confession. A man cannot write in March on paper that will not exist until October 18 months later. Not even Edmund, and Edmund was the cleverest man I ever knew. Until I had to become cleverer than him to survive him. The silence then was a different silence than the dinner. At the dinner they had been waiting for me to be ashamed. Now they were watching a man drown. "You weighed my husband's name and found it light," I said to Gerald. Because you have spent your whole life weighing stamps. You looked at a duke and saw money. You looked at a widow and saw a purse with no one to guard it. You never once weighed the thing itself. I picked up the balance and set the forged page in one brass pan, where it sat, and it was only paper. And the empty pan held its level against it, mocking. It does not even weigh much, your ruin. I had expected more. I do not know what I expected the Duke to do. I had told him to let me choose the ground, and he had. And he had stood through all of it, with his burned hand in the light, and his face very still. And only now did he move. And what he did was the thing I will carry to my own cold room at the last. He did not save me. He had understood, finally and completely, that I did not need saving, and never had. He turned to the room and he said, in the voice that 4 dukes obeyed without knowing they did it, "You have all just watched Mrs. Vane do in 5 minutes what my solicitors could not do in 3 days. I had thought to marry her for a great many foolish reasons. I find I will marry her for that one." And he looked at me, only at me. "If she will weigh me and have me." I closed the balance. "The essay," I said, "is complete." I crossed the library to him through the wreckage of Gerald Carr, and I took his burned hand in both of mine, in front of every duke in England, and I kissed him. Once, deliberately, the way you set your seal to a thing you have read with care and mean to honor. And the room made a sound I had never heard a London ballroom make, which was the sound of people who came to watch a woman ruined, and stayed to watch her crowned. We were married from my house, not his, with the smell of ink in the next room, and no flowers to speak of, though Mrs. Oakes put 1 rose on the table where Edmund used to sit, and I let her, and I did not weep. And that is its own kind of weeping. He signed it all back the day after, exactly as he had said. Every share, every shilling, into a trust the law cannot reach, and he cannot touch. Mine while I live, and mine to leave as I please. His solicitors wept actual tears. He laughed for the first time I had heard him truly laugh, the burn on his hand bright in the morning light, and said it was the best bargain a Carr had made in 3 generations, to give away a fortune and keep the only thing in it worth having. Gerald did not break his cousin's neck on a grey hunter. He did something duller and more fitting. He fled to Calais ahead of his creditors, where, I am reliably informed, he lives on the charity of a series of women who have not yet learned to weigh the thing itself, and where his coats grow shabbier every season, and where no one at all is watching. Which, for a man like Gerald, is the only true ruin there is. I kept the bank. Of course I kept the bank. A duchess may do a great many things her sisters cannot, and the men who once queued to take their money out now queue to put it in. Because there is no advertisement in London like a widow who paid every shilling in weighed gold with tea for the line. A year on, it was June again, the same cruel, sociable June. Marcus found me at the north window of the old business room, which we have not changed, where the light is even and cold and good for reading figures by. The coin balance sat on the sill. I had stopped carrying it. A woman who is no longer afraid of being handed false gold need not weigh every stranger at the door. So it lived on the windowsill now, the 2 small pans holding, in place of guineas, a single pressed rose, gone the colour of old paper, and the plain gold ring Edmund had given me, which I had taken off at last and could not quite put away. "Still weighing?" Marcus said, behind me, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder. "The burned one." The one he had let lie in the light the first night because he had decided, before he ever knew me, to be a man who hid nothing he was not ashamed of. No, I said. I weighed the last thing worth weighing a year ago. It came back true. I leaned into him. Below us, London went about its clever, clipping, gilding business, and could not touch us, and did not know it had ever tried. I am only keeping the scale. A woman should keep the tool that told her the truth, even after she has stopped needing it, especially then. He bent his head to mine. The rose held its level against the ring, and neither pan moved, and the cold, good light lay over the both of them, weighed and found, at long last, equal.